30 years have passed since the quiet voice of Bob Ross last filled American living rooms. For over a decade, he had been more than just a painter on television. He was a symbol of calm, kindness, and control in a chaotic world. His gentle tone, the soft rhythm of his brush, and the way he spoke about happy little trees made millions believe that beauty could exist in simplicity. But behind the serenity, there was pain. A lifetime of struggle, loss, and betrayal that he never revealed to his audience. Only now, decades after his death, has his family come forward to confirm what fans had long suspected, that the man who brought peace to others spent his final years surrounded by conflict, illness, and a fight for the very name that defined him. This is the untold story of Bob Ross, the artist, the soldier, the husband, and the man who never stopped painting, even when his world was falling apart. A tough beginning. Before the world knew him as the calm, soft-spoken artist who could turn a blank canvas into a peaceful paradise, Bob Ross was a boy growing up in a world far removed from the serenity he would one day create. Born on October 29, 1942, in Daytona Beach, Florida, Robert Norman Ross spent most of his childhood in the humid, working-class neighborhoods of Orlando. His parents, Jack and Ollie Ross, divorced when he was barely a year old, a fracture that quietly shaped his sense of independence and resilience. His mother worked as a waitress to keep food on the table, while his father earned a modest living as a carpenter, often taking on side jobs to survive. Bob grew up watching both of them struggle to make ends meet. There were no luxuries, no art classes, no galleries, just hard work and perseverance. From an early age, he learned how to fix things, feed stray animals, and stay quiet when adults argued. He adored his mother, once saying, "I'm very prejudiced, but I think I had the greatest mother there was." Ollie was patient and kind, but she raised him with discipline. When he wasn't at school, Bob worked odd jobs, trying to help her however he could. School, however, didn't hold his interest for long. In 9th grade, at just 14 years old, he dropped out to work full-time for his father's carpentry business. That decision would mark his first major sacrifice, trading childhood dreams for responsibility. One day on the job, his hand slipped while cutting wood, and he lost part of his left index finger. The accident was severe, but Bob never complained. Years later, he would joke about it on set, cleverly positioning his palette to hide the missing finger from the camera. In truth, the injury became symbolic of his quiet endurance, pain endured without bitterness. Despite the hardships, young Bob found small joys in caring for animals. He often rescued injured squirrels, snakes, and birds, nursing them back to health. His friends recalled that he was unusually gentle, talking to animals as if they understood every word. That compassion, so evident in his later television persona, had its roots in these early years of isolation and struggle. By the time he reached adulthood, life in Orlando had grown too narrow for him. The jobs were low-paying and his future uncertain. When he turned 18, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, not out of patriotism, but out of necessity. The Air Force promised steady pay, housing, and a way out of poverty. What he didn't realize was that this choice would lead him thousands of miles away to Alaska, a frozen world that would both harden him as a soldier and awaken him as an artist. It was there, amid silence and snow, that Bob Ross's transformation would quietly begin. The soldier who wanted peace. During his 2 decades in the Air Force, Bob Ross built a reputation as a disciplined, demanding first sergeant, a far cry from the soothing mentor the world would later know. His job required him to enforce rules, discipline, and obedience. He was, in his own words, the guy who makes you scrub the latrine, the guy who yells at you for being late. But the role ate away at him. It wasn't who he was. The strictness, the shouting, it went against every instinct he had. So he made a promise to himself. The day he left the military, he would never raise his voice again. That vow, made in the middle of his cold Alaskan posting, would later define his entire career. It was also in Alaska that Bob's destiny began to take shape. The breathtaking landscapes inspired him deeply. He practiced painting the snow-capped peaks, misty lakes, and pine-covered valleys that surrounded him, each brushstroke a form of quiet rebellion against the rigidity of military life. He started selling his paintings at local taverns and gift shops, often painted on gold panning tins or small boards. Over time, his art began to earn more than his Air Force paycheck. He saw a future outside the uniform, one where creativity replaced command. By the late 1970s, he discovered the magic of oil painting, a television show hosted by German painter Bill Alexander. Alexander's wet-on-wet technique fascinated him. Unlike the slow, traditional process of layering oil paint, this method allowed him to finish a painting in less than an hour. It was revolutionary, and it fit perfectly with television's pace. Yet when Bob first watched it, he felt something more complicated than admiration. "It almost made me angry," he later confessed. "He could do in minutes what took me days." That frustration turned into obsession. Bob mastered the technique until it became second nature. And in that process, he began to imagine something greater. A show that wasn't just about art, but about peace, healing, and the joy of creation itself. When he retired from the Air Force in 1981, after 20 years of service, Bob left behind his rank, his uniform, and his old self. He also left behind the voice that yelled orders. From that day forward, he spoke only in calm tones, with kindness and encouragement. The sergeant had become the teacher. Rise of a gentle icon. In 1983, The Joy of Painting premiered on public television. The format was simple: a blank canvas, a few colors, and a man who believed that everyone could paint. But what made the show extraordinary was Bob Ross himself. With his gentle voice, his soft laughter, and his famous phrases, "Happy little trees," "There are no mistakes, only happy accidents," he offered something more than an art lesson. He offered comfort. The show was produced by public television stations in Virginia and Indiana, with no flashy budget or celebrity endorsements. Yet it spread like wildfire. By the mid-1980s, The Joy of Painting aired on more than 200 stations across North America and was later translated into dozens of languages. Viewers didn't just watch Bob paint, they felt as though he painted for them. Veterans with PTSD, lonely widows, and even prisoners wrote to him, saying his calm voice gave them a reason to keep going. But as his fame grew, so did the demands of business. Bob and his second wife, Jane, partnered with Annette and Walt Kowalski to create Bob Ross Incorporated, the company that would handle merchandise, workshops, and training for new instructors. The Kowalskis were skilled entrepreneurs who saw the potential of turning Bob's image into a brand. For a time, the partnership thrived. They sold paints, brushes, and even instructional videos, all bearing Bob's smiling face. By 1991, the company was earning millions each year. Behind the scenes, however, cracks began to form. Bob, ever the artist, cared most about sharing joy and creativity. The Kowalskis, on the other hand, saw commercial opportunity. Tensions simmered quietly. Bob wanted to expand in his own way, to explore new projects, to involve his son, Steve. But his partners were focused on control. Despite the fame and fortune, Bob's life was beginning to mirror the quiet sadness of his paintings, beauty tinged with melancholy. Still, on screen, he remained the same, steady, kind, unshaken, the man who could turn a smudge of paint into a sunrise. Loss, illness, and betrayal. The late 1980s brought unimaginable pain to Bob Ross. In 1991, his mother passed away, a devastating loss for a man who had always called her his greatest inspiration. Just a year later, in 1992, His beloved wife, Jane, succumbed to cancer. The back-to-back losses left Bob emotionally broken, and then his own body began to fail him. He suffered from chronic cluster headaches so severe that he often painted through pain. Years of smoking caught up with him, leading to a heart attack in 1986. Then, in the early 1990s, the diagnosis came: lymphoma. He underwent aggressive chemotherapy and radiation, which caused his signature curls to fall out. Ever determined to maintain his calm image, Bob wore a wig on camera so fans would never know. He continued filming the joy of painting through exhaustion and nausea, often completing 3 or 4 episodes in a single day. Even as death loomed, he refused to stop creating. But behind closed doors, another battle was being waged, one that would haunt his legacy for decades. The Kowalskis, now controlling most of Bob Ross Incorporated, began pushing him to sign documents transferring full rights to his image, name, and work. They promised him a small profit share for 10 years, just 1%. Bob refused. He saw through the manipulation, understanding that the company bearing his name was slowly being taken from him. In 1995, just weeks before his death, he married Linda Brown, a quiet, private woman who cared for him in his final months. He also amended his will, removing the Kowalskis entirely and granting all rights to his son Steve and his half-brother Jimmy Cox. It was his final act of defiance, an attempt to protect his legacy from those who saw him as prophet, not person. But as his health deteriorated, the pressure intensified. Phone calls, legal threats, and desperate pleas from business partners disturbed his final days. According to his family, he would shout from his bed, "You're not getting my name." On July 4th, 1995, Bob Ross died quietly in his Orlando home at 52. The man who painted peace left the world amid chaos. The fight after death. Bob Ross's funeral was small and private. Just 25 family members and close friends gathered at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Gotha, Florida. His gravestone was simple, engraved only with his name, image, and the words, "Television Painter." There were no corporate representatives, no press, and, notably, no Kowalskis. But the battle he feared didn't end with his death. It was only beginning. Within months, Bob Ross Incorporated claimed ownership of his image, name, and all intellectual property. Despite the will naming his son and brother as heirs, a court later ruled that Bob had already transferred those rights to the company during his lifetime. By law, they no longer belonged to him. The Kowalskis became the sole owners of Bob Ross Incorporated, transforming it into a massive commercial brand. Over the years, Bob's face began appearing everywhere, on T-shirts, mugs, board games, and even energy drinks. Fans believed these products supported his family, but they did not. Steve Ross, Bob's only son, received nothing. In 2017, he filed a lawsuit against the company, hoping to reclaim his father's name and legacy. But the court's decision was devastating. The judge ruled that the intellectual property rights had never been Bob's to pass on. Steve was offered only a modest settlement and permission to teach painting under his own name. The legacy of kindness and creativity had become entangled in greed and legal red tape. The truth finally reached the public through the 2021 Netflix documentary Bob Ross: Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed. It exposed the emotional and financial exploitation behind the brand, revealing how the man who once represented joy had been trapped in corporate control, even after death. The company released a defensive statement denying wrongdoing, but for fans, the damage was done. They saw the truth. The man who preached happiness had spent his last years surrounded by betrayal, the legacy he left behind. 3 decades later, Bob Ross remains more alive in popular culture than ever. His show, The Joy of Painting, streams on YouTube and Twitch, reaching millions of new viewers. His soft-spoken lessons, once broadcast on PBS, now comfort people from every generation. In a world that feels louder and harsher than ever, his calm voice still brings peace. But his legacy is bittersweet. While his family receives no financial benefit from the vast empire built on his image, they find solace in knowing that his spirit endures. Steve Ross, now in his 50s, continues teaching painting workshops, keeping his father's philosophy alive, that art is not about perfection, but peace. Fans across the world still gather to paint together, following his every stroke and whispering his words, "Let's add a happy little tree right here." Bob's life was filled with contradictions. Pain hidden beneath kindness, exploitation beneath fame, and tragedy beneath serenity. Yet he never allowed bitterness to define him. His promise to never raise his voice again held true until his final breath. He turned suffering into serenity, conflict into color, and impermanence into immortality. And perhaps that's why his family's final confirmation, that his life ended in betrayal but his soul remained pure, feels both tragic and beautiful. Bob Ross gave the world peace, even when he had none left for himself. For 30 years, his gentle smile has lived on, not just in paintings, but in the hearts of those who still find comfort in his words. Bob Ross taught us that mistakes can be happy accidents and that even sadness can create something beautiful. Now that the truth of his final days is known, one question remains. Do you believe his kindness was his greatest masterpiece of all? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and watch our next video for more untold stories behind the people who changed the world.